Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. And so we see some natural break here in this passage. This first passage, 1 through 5, talks about surety. The 6 through what we'll talk about next week is the sluggard, and then we'll continue on from there. But these are traps that we fall into, and Solomon's going to address some traps that men can fall into and that we have to be careful about. And so it starts out with this idea of surety. Chapter 5 basically dealt with sexual immorality, and then we come to this next chapter, and it just starts off here with this idea of surety. In Solomon's day, the way they had made contracts, today there's a difference between today and what it was back then. Your word meant everything. It wasn't necessarily signing your name on the dotted line. It was this idea of striking hands or shaking hands, and they would do that, and you could get yourself into a very deep trouble making deals, and so we think about that, and when two people struck hands and made a deal, you had to commit and had to uphold your end of the deal. It was as binding as something that was legal today. And so, we think about it back then, and there was a day, in Solomon's day, slavery was a real thing. And then servanthood, or bondservant, which meant you sold yourself to be a slave because you could not pay your debts. And so people would make debts, would make things, and then make commitments, and then when they couldn't pay, they would have to be the servant for years for certain parts. And what we see in the Old Testament is that God put in laws to protect the children of Israel from that culture. And one of those things was they were not to charge interest to their brothers and sisters, anybody who was part of the Jewish nation there. They were not to take interest. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But also, every 7 years was a year of Jubilee, which means they couldn't extend a contract of bondservant past the 7 years. And so every 7 years, things would be rightfully put back in place. And then there was also, and I don't remember the full context of it, but at a certain point, any land you sold would go back to the family, and so that they couldn't even take the land away from the family for just forever. The land would reset. I think it was every 49 years. I'm not sure exactly when that was. And so God put a lot of protections into the law for His people, and so we have to understand that. Even today, when we think about surety, when we think about interest, when we think about servanthood and things like that, we have some legal protections as well. But we have to think about back then, people were getting themselves into a lot of trouble. I was talking with Pastor Gary, and he was talking about this area in Syria or Jordan, not Jordan, some area in the Middle East where their business is making bricks, and they would sell themselves to brick making for years on time, and they never could get paid off. They never could get out of that, and so they were stuck for their whole life working for some family debt that had to be paid. And I can't, you don't even imagine that in these days and age that we live in America, but that was a real thing. It's a real thing in today's day, and that was a real thing back then. People would sell their children into slavery. They would sell themselves into slavery when they couldn't pay. And so this was definitely something to mark and avoid. The word for, if you turn with Exodus chapter 22 real quick, I'm setting some groundwork here. Exodus 22 and verse 25. It says, "If thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury. If thou at all take thy neighbor's raiment to pledge, thou shalt deliver it unto him. By that the sun goeth down." And so God was strict in the law on how people would deal, how the Israelites should deal with their fellow man. And it's interesting to me because, we look at today and we know interest is a problem and usury is a problem, but it was a problem back then when they wrote the law. It was a problem back then. And for thousands of years, banks and things of that nature have become rich and stayed rich with this idea of usury. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And so Solomon is warning his son to be careful because once you make a pledge, once you promise something to a friend or to a third party, he uses the idea of walking into a snare. Thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. And so think about a bear trap or a trap for birds or a trap for squirrels, and you've walked into a snare, which means something has a hold on you that we can't control. And so we have to recognize this. And today's day and age, you can look at it as co-signing a loan or getting into an agreement or things like that, loaning money to family or to friends. I think this covers pretty generically what we do with money. And we have to be careful about that. We have to recognize that anytime money gets into a relationship or a situation, there's a potential for people to get hurt. Many evils start over money. The love of money is the root of all evil. And so when we let that money get into any situation, there's a whole bunch of new rules that start to be written about that relationship. Family members who don't speak to each other anymore, best friends who are no longer best friends, relationships that have broken up. All these things happen. Why? Because they got in some kind of squabble about money. And so Solomon addresses this in Proverbs chapter 6. And he says, if you've stricken hands, if you're surety for thy friend, if you've stricken thine hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of your mouth. You're in a trap. It's a warning throughout Proverbs that we find. And so there's two situations and two different things that we have to be careful about that Solomon warns us about and how it works. The first is being surety for a friend. And so this is relational and personal. This is someone you care about, you love, you trust. And we still have to be careful how we allow money to come into that relationship. If we make a commitment, if we make a promise, if we make we use the words of our mouth to say something, we should stand by the words that we say. And that's where it gets really touch and go in relationships. And I know this from personal experience. You'll say, "Oh, I'll pay you back," and that doesn't happen, and then things go bad. And so, people we care about, we have to be careful to take this with an ounce of wisdom with it. I've been on both sides of this trap, whether it's asking to borrow money or lending money, and there's so many things that can go wrong. When we have family, even I remember when I first got to Michigan a little while later, Amanda's dad was selling a Prius, and I went and I said, "Well, we need a car, so I'll pay you a certain amount of months." And I don't think I was as faithful as I should have been in getting him that money on time the way it should have been. I did end up getting the money when it was all said and done, but it wasn't at the agreement, whatever. I don't even know if we had a full agreement on the whole thing, but that's where it gets messy. And then they have problems with me, and I have problems with them all over this cardio. And you know what I said after that? I'm never doing that again. Never doing that again. Because you know what? If it's we get ourselves into trouble where there ought not to be trouble. And so it's a trap of good intentions. Meaning, when we make these deals, we're often trying to help someone, or someone's trying to help us, and it's out of love and out of care and things like that. But it ends up ruining. It ruins things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. These are people we care about, but we have to be wise and think about it. We look here and see what Solomon says, and in verse 1, Solomon doesn't say, if thou be surety for thy enemy. He says, if thou be surety for thy friend. And so we have to recognize that this is the people that we're close to that puts us in this position, and that are going to ask us for things throughout life. And the people that we're close to, we automatically have a hard time saying no to. Whether it's our children, whether it's our parents, things like that. And so the first one there is if thou art surety for thy friend. And then we see the second one, if you've stricken hands with a stranger. And so that's this is talking about something different. This is making a deal or making a contract in today's day and age with someone you don't know. What is that? Well, that's like our banks, our car notes, we can talk about all the different types of things that we can take debt out on, but it's a formal agreement with someone who's looking out for them, not looking out for you. We think about our interactions with banks and dealerships and credit card companies, and you always sign this contract that, I don't know if you guys are this way, but it's like, am I going to read through all the things? If I went and read through all things, I wouldn't sign. And so I literally say, no. I know I'm in some way or another. This is their. So just off the top, they wrote it. It's for their benefit. I'm always the one that's going to take the hit. And so we almost feel that way. I remember when I did our mortgage. That stack of papers was so long. Like, thank God for e-signing now. You just scroll down to the bottom and click sign. I'm not saying, listen, guys, I'm not saying this is a good idea. I'm just saying this is how the reality of it is, because we've done it a couple times. But on those hundreds of pages there that you do on a mortgage loan, they have the breakdown of every payment that you would make, and how much of it would be interest, and how much of it goes to the principal. And if you look at that alone is enough to make you sick. So if you want to still sign the mortgage, don't look at that page. But if you don't want, if you want to get out of it, look at that page, right? It's tough, and I'll explain a little bit more of that later. But what we recognize is that we didn't decide what the late penalties would be. We didn't decide what the interest rate was going to be. We didn't decide anything. That stranger did, or that other company did, and we sign on the line. And that contract is not to protect you. That contract is to protect them, and we have agreed to play by their rules. That's really striking hands with a stranger. It's not this closeness to a brother that we're caring about, but just a contract with a stranger. We know that when we sign these things, we just can't walk away from it. There's legal consequences and things that will catch up with us as we do that. And we sign ourselves up into a system that is designed to catch and hold on to people as long as they can. And so we need to recognize that just as we think about these things, as we get ourselves into these things, understand what we're walking into. We're walking into a snare. Proverbs 6 and verse 2 says, thou art snared by the words of thy mouth, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. It's kind of interesting how it's written. We're talking about two different situations. You're snared and you're taken. And so if we make a promise, a pledge, if we put our word on something, we should stick to it. But it does get, life happens and things happen, and we find ourselves in sometimes bad situations because we have overcommitted. Things we shouldn't say to our friends, our family, is don't worry about it, pay it back when you can, or things like that. All these things, because when we say that and we're going to give somebody something, whether we like it or not, we do have some expectations in return, and we have to understand and know what our own expectations are. We have to recognize when we lend money, when we give money, in situations and things, we cannot control what that person does with it, whether they're smart, whether they'll prioritize paying you back. You can't control their circumstances, and worse things can come down the line that would just make whatever we do a drop in the bucket. When we're with our friends and family, we have to remember that our relationship at that point could be put on the line. Just something as simple as, I lend someone money and they can't pay me back. All of a sudden, they don't want to hang around with me anymore because they know that they should have done what they've done. They should have done what they, had committed to, and then they feel uncomfortable being in that situation, and you just lose friends so easily because of that. Look with me in Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 15. Proverbs 11 and verse 15. It says, he that is surety for a stranger shall smart for it, and he that hateth suretyship is sure. And so we want to have a sound foundation, a sure foundation. And, we don't want to walk blindly into things. If we're a surety for a stranger, smart is to get pain, is to hurt over it. And so, if we're surety for a stranger, you can guarantee at some point it's gonna bite and hurt. And he that hateth suretyship is sure. And so, if we want to have that solid foundation, don't learn not to put money in the middle of relationships, because the relationship will then be on rocky ground. It says in Proverbs 17:18, a man void of understanding striketh hands and becometh surety in the presence of his friend. And so, all throughout Proverbs, we're going to see this idea of suretyship as a mistake and not what we should be doing. And so, be careful how we allow that to come into our relationships. Let's look now in Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 3. It says, do this now, my son, when thou art come into the hand of thy friend, go and humble thyself and make sure thy friend. And so if we find ourselves, if we've at any point gotten ourselves in a place where we've asked someone for money or where we have borrowed money, the Bible tells us go now, right? It doesn't say, do this now. Right away. See, what we want to do once we put money in a situation is we want to pretend like it's the elephant in the room and don't speak about it. And the Bible tells us differently. Go now and deliver thyself, and when thou art come unto thy friend, go and humble thyself. If we can't make that obligation and things like that, we need to communicate that and really learn to maintain that friendship in spite of the money situation that's going on. Humble ourselves, be willing to talk about it and do that. And I think when we think about this, we have to recognize, number one, the urgency, do it right away, and then the idea of humbling ourselves and saying, if I am going to do what I'm supposed to do, I'm not going to let other priorities get in the way of me repaying what I promised, because I know that this is going to be a problem in this relationship. It says, make sure thy friend. When we get money in the middle of things, then we have to recognize that there's always a chance, a continual chance of that relationship breaking down, and we need to keep working at maintaining that friendship. If we are in a financial entanglement with someone we love, a friend, a family member, have an honest conversation about it. Make sure that we're talking about these things, and that we don't want money to be a problem in between us, and let's figure out how to get this done as quickly as possible together. And then maybe you admit, it probably wasn't the best idea to do to take this loan or to do this with family. I've heard stories in the past. Someone we knew borrowed $40,000 from his parents to pay off credit cards, and then 6 years later he racked them all back up again. And it's just like, holy cow! That's just, number one, that person was not learning their lesson, and he got off too easy the first time, and he never learned it, and so back in the same position. And we hear about these things, and it's frustrating and difficult, and you lose friends and family in these areas when things like this happen. We have to be willing and learn to humble ourselves in those areas. Understand that our relationships are worth preserving, and that a relationship is worth more than any money. Keep the friendship, keep the family intact. Maybe you have to forgive debt on your side. Maybe you have to work out a different plan, but something that works for both of them. Unfortunately, most financial problems become like an elephant in a room that just nobody wants to talk about or deal with. And what we recognize is in families and in friendships, when we get into a money situation with someone, that other person subconsciously judges everything you do after that point, because their financial things are tied up with yours now. And so just a coffee from Starbucks, all of a sudden someone's going to judge that. Maybe you shouldn't have done that because they owe somebody money. And it gets really, really difficult really quick. And so we have to make sure of our friend, check that friendship, clarify, make sure we can make the commitments that we set ourselves up for. When it comes to a deal with a stranger, shaking hands with a stranger, there's so many traps in this world that we need to be careful about. Afterpay and Klarna and 7 other different apps that are out there, they are made, number one, to make it easy to give you money, but also make it easy for them to collect that money back. And so we have to recognize those things. And that is all striking hands with a stranger. Interest is the number one tool that people use to get wealthy in this world. We look at the banks, and they have the skyscrapers and the offices and the fancy things, and the average Joe doesn't. So what does that tell you? Everything that they do is built to benefit them, not you. No matter what it feels like, no matter what the marketing tactic or the promise or I can have this right now, understand that when we strike hands, it's always in their benefit. We're always going to get the worst end of that deal. And it's interest is a way to transfer money from the working person to the wealthy person, and we need to recognize that. Debt is never a friend, and the stranger never cares about us. I saw this video, and it's funny but not funny at the same time. It says if you owe $500,000 to the bank, you got a problem, but if you owe $500 million to the bank, they got a problem. and that's the way it kind of works because they're over leveraged at that point. But we don't want to get ourselves in a position where the bank is overly involved in our life. The stranger is not our friend. They're not there to look out for us. And we're playing their game by their rules. And they have rules. It's like, when you go to a casino, you have to recognize the house always wins. And I'm not saying go to a casino, but if we recognize that the reason why we don't do that is because we're going to their house playing by their rules. And that is the exact same way. What the general knowledge was there's good debt and then there's bad debt. Credit cards and things like that would be considered bad debt, but mortgages would be considered good debt. And we really have to be careful even calling anything good these days. What I saw in 2008 was just old enough to really understand was that when the market goes down below the point where all what people owe on those houses and they become underwater, that's a really bad position to be in. And today's day and age, where houses are the most expensive they've ever been, and interest rate is the highest that it's been in a long time, there is a high chance of that happening again when you buy a house and then you're underwater with it. And so that's not a good plan. That is not considered good debt. It's not going to be considered good debt, even if you have a mortgage. The general wisdom is that you have to live in a house 5 years before you start making any actual money off that house. So they say buying is better than renting, but you have to live in that house for 5 years and pay off everything that the mortgage made, everything that the person who sold you the house made, all the things that, the liens and all those things that everybody doing all their work in. You have to pay off that. It takes 5 years to get to a point where, you start paying yourself, essentially, for that house. And so remember that, be wise in that case. If you're not going to stay in the house 5 years, you're going to lose money on that calculation. Someone might ask me, well, Eli, do you have a mortgage? Do you have a car loan? Do you have credit cards? And I'd say yes, yes, yes. And all this to say, we have to understand the hold that has on our life and what the Bible says about that. Number one, if we're in bondage to a friend, deliver thyself, humble thyself, don't make sure thy friend. Verse 4 is if we're in bondage to a stranger, it says, give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and a bird from the hand of the fowler. So we're commanded to do something at that point. If we put ourselves in uncomfortable positions financially, we are commanded to not sleep and to work and do what we're supposed to, do what it takes to get out of that situation. And so we're not supposed to just let that sit. We're supposed to work our way out of that situation, go do more and extra. And then that's not comfortable, but it's important for us. All right. I'm going to try to end here in about 5 minutes. We got some people coming in, things like that. But so don't sleep on it, but work towards getting out of these debts. I want to talk about how money ruins relationships. Putting money between two people always damages and hurts the relationship. I thought that's who it was. It's Keith. I'm just going to wave and say hi because I saw it right there. And so let's go ahead and do this. Let's close up here. Let's pause here. And we'll take an extra 15 minutes, let everybody come in, and we'll get back to the main service. And I could go longer than that. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week as we go into the next thing. But let's take a break and welcome some of our visitors and things like that. What? I don't think so. What's that? I didn't know. No. No, I saw Duke walking up. I'm like, man, that looks like teeth coming in. Okay, so how is this connection here? Oh. Yes. Awesome.